The goal of Myers-Briggs is to equip and empower you with self-awareness, right? Not to limit you based on a type. And that it would always be kind of this focus on understanding yourself more. I said that kind of crazy. Understanding yourself more so that you can be more equipped in whatever role it is that you want to step into. And it should never feel limiting. It should always feel like equipping and empowering you to move on to the next stage of life or to the next team or, to the next season that you're going into in your, current position.
Welcome to Personality Playbook. My name is Sadie Young.
And I'm Kayla Whittle.
Today we're going to get into the background of Myers-Briggs because I always think it's important if you're going to study something to know a little bit about it before you just jump headfirst into it. So we're going to start off by talking about the history and the origins of Myers-Briggs. And I promise you, I'm going to try to keep that short. And anybody that's super into it, I'll do an in-depth video on it later. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what Myers-Briggs is and what Myers-Briggs isn't.
Right.
So we're going to start off by saying that Myers-Briggs was developed by Catherine Briggs and Isabel Briggs Myers, who are a mother-daughter team. And Catherine actually became interested in differences in people that weren't a problem. She noticed that psychologists were always trying to figure out what was wrong with different people. And she noticed that people seemed to have major differences in each other that she didn't identify as a mental illness.
They're not maladaptive. It's just a different way of living, a different preference for living out different actions.
Exactly.
Right.
Eventually, in 1921, Carl Jung, who was, and that's J-U-N-G, Jung, if you ever wanted to know how that was pronounced, came out with the theory of psychological types. He released that as a book in 1921. And it was translated into English in 1923. And so Catherine found his work and realized this is exactly what I've been thinking about and looking for a long time. Jung obviously wrote a book about it, and we'll put a link to this in the comments, but this is the book, Psychological Types by C.G. Jung. It's written for psychologists. It's not written for, just weekend reading unless you're way into reading textbooks or fun.
You never know.
Which some people are.
Yeah.
But this is readily available. And this was the book that Catherine Briggs read. And Jung gave the theory behind different people's personality types. He didn't really leave anyone with the way to figure out what your type was. And he didn't say a lot about what to do with type. Catherine and her daughter ended up picking up where Jung left off, and they especially were interested in using this during World War II when women were moving into the workforce, and they thought it would be a great thing for women to use themselves to figure out where they might find a good fit in the workplace as far as what professions might be interesting to them that they would not have otherwise been able to learn. Now, notice that I said that we'll get into this more continuously. I'll probably say this a million times, but they considered it to be an instrument for the job seeker to use to find a career. It was not supposed to be used as a way for a company to choose.
For you to gain employment somewhere, right? We don't need you to disclose your type before we say, hey, you have to be this type in order to have this position. It's really a tool that's used for self-awareness. What do I know about myself so that I can feel equipped and empowered to walk into a position that's going to fit me well?
Exactly. I'm going to give myself the hook right now because I could talk about all of this history stuff for hours. And, like I said, if anybody's up for that, feel free to leave it in the comments and I'll be happy to oblige you at a later date. But for now, I think that gives you a good enough background so that we can jump into what Myers-Briggs is versus what it's not.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Myers-Briggs is an assessment. It's not a test, meaning you're not going to get wrong answers. It's not going to come up with, hey, you have a bad personality, right? It's an indicator. So there's not right or wrong answers. And it just looks at normal behavior. And normal behavior, the interesting thing is what's normal for me might be largely different than what's normal for Sadie. Her and I have different personality types. But it's all good information to know. So really, it's just gaining self-awareness. It's a tool that's used to help us understand ourselves and understand the world that we're in, and sometimes understand others a little bit better as well.
Absolutely. And, I always say the other reason we call it not a test is because you can't flunk it. And everybody knows that's why you don't like tests, because you're afraid you're going to flunk the test.
Yeah, nobody wants to think they're going to take a personality test and the test says, you have 0 personality. Right? So we don't call it a test. We call it an indicator. It's an assessment, and it's going to describe 4 aspects of a person's life. And we will jump into that here in just a minute.
Yes. As far as the usage goes, Myers-Briggs is actually the most widely used personality assessment in the world. It's given by most Fortune 100 companies, and I would also say most Fortune 500 companies use it in some sort of capacity. It's administered more than 2 million times a year in over 30 languages. And it's given in more than 70 countries. And it used to be that you could really only readily get the assessment in English and Spanish. But now, I can easily download it in several different Chinese languages. And you can get it in quite a few different languages, even here in the United States. It can help you in relationships and self-understanding. It's really good for leadership development and for team building and also for decision making.
We kind of have to get into what we believe about personality, right? And who we are as it relates to these natural qualities that we were born with. And so much of who we are relates to what we would call in psychology nature, right? So what we were born with, kind of these core pieces of our personality that are really unchanging through our lifetime, that really is our inherent tendencies that we have. Anybody, I don't have siblings, so it's funny that I'm saying this, but anybody who has siblings, you'll know that oftentimes, even when everything else in the house is very, very similar, right? Like parents are similar, all of that, that siblings can vary widely in personality, right? I know I have 3 kids in our house, and I would like to think they've had a pretty similar upbringing, and they all just have these really unique individual tendencies, which tells us that we're really born with differences in our personality that are inherent, that are part of things that we inherit genetically. All right. So that's one part and one belief as it relates to personality, which is that there are these qualities that we're just born with.
Absolutely. And those can be kind of similar to the fact that everybody's born with an eye color.
Right.
And, that's not something you can't change your eye color based on, what kind of day you had.
Sure.
Although that might be interesting and also kind of scary.
I think there's some vampire things related to that, maybe.
Quite possibly, yeah. Wait, do you glow or something?
Yeah.
So the flip side to the pieces of our personality that we're born with, which Kayla talked about being nature, would be nurture. Nurture is anything that has to do with how you were raised. Whereas Kayla was talking about with her kids, even though they're probably raised in a really similar fashion living in her household, they've come out quite different from that. If your personality were only based on nurture, which are the things that happen to you in life, the things that surround you in life, her kids would all be the same.
Right.
Which would be kind of strange, right? That's not what you expect. So nurture is going to be anything that impacts you from the outside. It's going to, even though family seems like an inside thing, but family is something that you grow up in that impacts you, the things that happen in your life, the culture that you're raised in, and even microcultures. We think about culture as being like what country you're from and all of those kinds of things, but even things like the kids in your neighborhood and how well you get along with them and different environmental influences.
Birth order.
Absolutely, birth order. When we're going to give a shout out to, even though I'm the youngest and Kayla's an only, I'm going to give a shout out to middle children because we never get the shout out. So we're not going to shout out anybody else.
Nobody else, only the middle kids.
Go middle kids. So, if we're going back to the physical characteristics, like we talked about eye color and things, this would be like the weather. And, so how many times have you, I remember my mom telling me a million times, you can't wear that. It's raining outside. And I'm like, so,
right.
So those are things that we sometimes resist wanting to comply with dressing for weather and those types of things. Mm-hmm. But they're definitely things that have a huge impact on who we are and how our day-to-day lives are lived.
Right.
Jung believed that both of these things, both nature and nurture, play an extremely important part in who we become as people. And I think if you just look at it logically, that
makes a lot of sense.
That's kind of a big duh, right? That it just makes sense that both of those things are true. But he believes the theory of personality type that he came up with, that Myers-Briggs is based on, describes the nature aspect of our personality. In other words, you are born with a type.
Right.
And that type is supposed to stay the same throughout your life. And I hear people, it's funny, I end up saying this so often because how many people have argued with you about that?
I know. I was about to say it just now, but go for it.
Half of them?
Yeah, at least. I can explain the specific types that argue that with me. But.
That's true. Yeah, there's and usually when people say that to you, you're like, oh, that means you're one of two types.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, that was terrible. I shouldn't have said that, but we'll get into that more later. And most of the time, you're right.
Yeah, but what we're talking about is that a lot of people want to come to us and say, "Oh, I used to be more extroverted as a child, but as an adult, I'm an introvert now." And while we love to hear about people's experiences and understand where they're coming from whenever they say things like that to us, it also kind of makes us go on the inside a little bit because we want to say, hey, there is a nature part of your personality that's true to the core. And you can develop outside of that and you can come up with new things that you enjoy and that you value. But the true core of who you are, according to Jung and personality theory that Myers-Briggs is based on, it would be that if you were an extrovert as a child, you're probably still an extrovert now.
Yes.
If you're an introvert as a child, you're probably still an introvert now.
And on the same token, I also have people very often that, and one of the types that I'm thinking of that I just said claims to change type, it really fits more into this category of there are some people who do not wish to claim a type at all.
Right.
They believe they are all the things. Mm-hmm. And that's something we'll definitely get into more as we move forward too. And I can understand why people would like that idea. There's this idea that if I can master all the things, then that must be better than if I didn't master all the things. Right. But it's actually easier to function as a person if you discover your way of doing things that's easier for you and you move forward that way. It's kind of the difference between trying to, when you... not that I've ever done this, but if you were to raise a child to be bilingual, they will eventually learn both languages, but it takes them longer to learn any language because you're trying to teach two things at once. It's easier if you teach, it'll happen quicker if you teach them one thing first and then the other.
Right.
With that, you'll find we are rabbit trail kind of.
Sometimes we do, but we'll always bring it back around. We'll always bring it back around. A couple of things that Myers-Briggs does not measure. And one of those things is intelligence, right? When we're looking at personality, we're not looking at an IQ. It's really separate from that. Any of the types can have varying levels of intelligence, and we don't test for that, or we don't look for that as a part of the assessment. It also does not look at maturity, right? Because types as children display differently than types as an adult. It does not look at our emotions. People can have varying levels of emotional intelligence, I guess you could call it, or just emotional expression specifically. But yeah, so those are a couple of things that Myers-Briggs is not.
Absolutely. It also doesn't tell you where you are developmentally.
Right.
And we will get into the fact that there are assessments that children can start to take. There's the Murphy-Meisgeier type indicator for children that kids can take and even have the questions read to them before they can read. You can identify type at many different stages of life, but it doesn't tell you where you are developmentally. It doesn't tell you if you are stressed out at the moment, which is probably good because so many people use this in work and, just the idea of that can be stressful. Right. It's not going to tell you if you've had trauma in your past. And it also is not going to tell you about your emotional health level. And I think this is important. This is, especially when you do take it in a work environment. Right. I think people are afraid that the assessment's going to tell you something's wrong with you. This is not at all going to diagnose any sort of mental disorders that may be there. And that's something that when you get into Myers-Briggs, you don't have to worry about. It's more positive psychology related.
Absolutely.
It's only going to tell you stuff that is normal. And I always like to tell people Myers-Briggs is not designed to tell you what you can and cannot do. And I think the reason I started really focusing on that is because when Kayla and I were first using this assessment, we were using it at University of West Georgia, which is where we met. And so we would always give this career report back to kids. I say kids, college students. They were usually freshmen that we were working with. So, and you would often hear the career report has this list of careers on it that different types are suited for. And you would always hear at least one kid go, man, I was going to be a nurse, but that's not on here, so I can't do that. So I always tell people, the assessment's good at telling you what people of different types tend to gravitate towards and what they tend to go for, but that does not in any way mean that if your type is not typical for a profession that you can't do it.
Right.
But it will inform how you go about it and how that profession affects you.
Sure. Essentially, what we're saying is we want Myers-Briggs, and really the goal of Myers-Briggs is to equip and empower you with self-awareness, right? Not to limit you based on a type. And that it would always be kind of this focus on understanding yourself more. I said that kind of crazy. Understanding yourself more so that you can be more equipped in whatever role it is that you want to step into. And it should never feel limiting. It should always feel like equipping and empowering you to move on to the next stage of life or to the next team or, to the next season that you're going into in your, current position.
Sure. I think there are things that both you and I enjoy doing that are maybe outside of what is typical for our type.
Absolutely.
And maybe we just have to understand there are certain things that I like to do that I know I'm going to really have a great time doing that, but I'm going to need a nap afterwards.
Right. It's going to be exhausting.
Yeah, sure. It's a matter of energy. And so type to me is a great way of understanding how to manage your energy levels and knowing when you go into something, what it's going to cost you.
Yeah.
So now
being equipped for self-care.
Yes.
Like being equipped with the knowledge that you need to appropriately care for yourself is another great way to utilize this tool.
And I will tell you that my 40-year-old self thinks about that a whole lot more than my 20-year-old self.
Absolutely. Or myself with 3 children thinks about that a lot more.
Yeah. And if you're sitting here going, what do you mean manage your energy levels? Then congratulations on your youth.
Yeah. Tuck that away. Put it to the side. You can pull it back out
and later you're going to be like, I hate you. You were right.
Yeah, I am tired.
If only you could put it in a bottle and keep it for later.
Sure.
So we're going to do an exercise. And if you'd like to join us at home, we have we managed to find pencils and 2 pieces of paper. And yes, I have construction paper in my house and not normal paper where we're filming. But feel free to follow along on a piece of scrap paper with the exercise that we're about to do, because we describe type as being like handedness. I can also hear there's always one person, most people are right-handed. Some people are left-handed. Shout out to the left-handers because they never get the shout outs.
Yeah.
And there's always one person that's going to tell me I'm ambidextrous, or they don't know that word, but they tell me they can use both hands.
Right.
So,
or amphibious, somebody told me. Like, oh, cool. Land and sea.
Wow. And I bet that makes it really hard to hold a pen.
The webbed feet.
Fingers. Yeah. As we both do as amphibian hands.
Yeah.
So what you're going to do to describe this, whether you're right-handed or left-handed, I want you to take a pen or a pencil or your stylus and hold it in whatever hand you tend to prefer to use to write your signature. And you're going to think this is crazy, but all I want you to do is sign your name, however you normally do it, on your scrap piece of paper.
A little scratch to your signature.
Oh, really?
Like,
ooh, I'm making noises with it.
Very official.
Oh, boy, there's something about pencil on construction paper.
Yeah. We would show you, but you really wouldn't be able to see it.
Yeah, it's kind of, I should have prepared for this better. I should have gotten some nice, markers so we could show this to you. Now that you've done that, and you're wondering, why in the world did this woman just get me to sign my name on a piece of paper? That's ridiculous. I want you to think about how it felt for you to do that. And most of the time I do get a big fat duh out of people after they've done that. They're like, what was this like for you, Kayla?
I could probably do it with my eyes closed. Who knows how many times a day I do it.
Yeah.
I don't really think about it anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah, I didn't have to think about the letters, like the individual letters, because there's just like a flow of how I always sign. Yeah.
So it's almost natural.
It feels
to you.
natural, mindless. Yeah, just
kind of like if I asked you to put on a pair of socks.
right. I could get that done.
You don't really think about that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what we have here. All right. Now this is the part where I torture you. And I'm not even sorry. It's fun.
It's fun. And we're going to do it with you. So
exactly.
it's fun.
We're torturing us too.
Yeah, we're doing it
together.
Good. Do it together.
I mean, it's always fun when you're in person to hear the laughter, but we know that you're going to laugh. I want you to take the pencil or the pen. I want you to put it in your other hand. And I haven't done this in a while. And I want you to sign your name with the other hand.
Your non-dominant hand.
We'll wait.
Even you amphibious people. Okay. And the real trick is to do this without sticking your tongue out.
It's kind of like putting mascara on without opening your mouth.
Right?
It's
nearly
not
impossible.
easy to do.
I do this a lot. I feel like I'm getting better. Getting better. I'm not amphibious yet, though.
Oh, maybe someday it'll be amphibious. I don't know. Maybe I'm going to be reptilian instead.
Okay.
I think I just made a Q on the end of my name.
You're just wanting to be closer to young.
Yeah, I'm yonk.
Yeah.
All right. So now that we have done that,
I don't know.
I think the first thing that we'll notice is that took a long time.
Took a lot longer.
Yeah.
Took a lot more
did you notice?
concentration.
Right.
It felt awkward.
Yes.
It is much. It looks
Yours
worse.
is bigger.
Yeah, I go with the bigger because it's hard. The fine motor,
Right, like
it's harder
motor
when
skills
you're
are not the same.
non-dominant. Yeah, so you have to kind of make it something different than it originally. You have to do it a different way.
Mine looks a little bit like when I was learning cursive in 3rd grade. And for those of you who don't know what cursive is, I'm sorry they don't teach that anymore.
Yeah.
I'm sure some places still do, but apparently a lot of them don't.
Mm-hmm.
So now let me ask you this. All right, so it's not great looking. It doesn't match the first one. Although I occasionally have people who have really crazy normal signatures that will tell me that you can actually read the letters on the second one because they were trying to write
they
letters.
worked on each individual letter.
Exactly.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But I'm willing to guess that yours at home looks different than your first signature did.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still a signature. Say what you will about it. It might be ugly. It might be huge. It might be, looking like you wrote it in kindergarten.
Right.
But you still have a signature. So type is like this. The first time you wrote your name or you signed your name is like your type preferences. When you use your type preferences, whatever you're doing with them comes pretty naturally to you. You feel like you don't have to think about it too hard. You're able to accomplish things fairly easily. And you know pretty much what the result is going to look like when you're done.
Right.
Because you've practiced
Sure.
doing things in that way. Whereas you can always do things on the other side. We're not saying that you can't.
Yeah.
You will have to, throughout your life, do many, many things in a way that is not one of your preferences. But when you do those things, it's going to take a little bit longer.
Mm-hmm.
You might not like the result as much.
Right.
And you're probably going to be a little bit tired, at least a little bit tired after you're finished
Right.
with those things.
Something I usually say is that, let's say that you were put in a scenario, if we're using handedness as the example, that you broke your dominant hand, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I break my right hand, I'm right-handed dominant. I might even get a lot better at this. I might be able to write better, but it's really never going to feel the same as working within that natural preference, as using my right hand that I was kind of born to use, right? To be able to write with.
Absolutely.
So it's not an incapable thing. It's just saying, man, it's still just this. It just feels like home over here, right? It doesn't feel like it's at home over in this other place.
Yeah, it feels good. It feels comfortable.
Right.
And yeah, you're always just almost like you're more in the groove, so to speak, when you're able to do things with your preferred preference.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to continue to tell you this throughout everything that we always do because
It's who we are.
It's who we are. And it's something that people, I think, forget a lot of times when they're having the debate between which preference, they prefer.
Sure.
I was trying to figure out a way to say that without saying preference, prefer, because that's the same thing twice, but that's what it is. There we are with that piece. What we're going to do moving forward is we're going to look at 4 pairs of opposites. We always will use both sides of these things. In fact, Jung actually said, if you ever meet a person who 100% all of the time uses one preference without using the other, that would be kind of a scary looking person. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's actually not really human to go 100% on one side and never visit the other side at all. But, one is always going to be the natural preference like we just talked about.
Right. I think of it like a spectrum instead of a checked box on one side or the other. Think of it like definitely over here, right? Like, definitely over here. Some people feel a little better on a number line or a line instead of a checked box.
That's true. Even though the assessment itself doesn't allow you to do that. Right. It's a forced choice assessment. So you're either this or you're this on the assessment. Right. I always describe it as you're going to lean.
That's what I mean. Yeah, if we're on the spectrum, then we're able to lean to one direction or the other.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Even if you're just leaning a little bit, you're going to find that one's more comfortable. As we talked about earlier, Jung believed that your preferences do not change over the course of your life. And when I say that, I don't mean that they don't begin to look different and that you don't grow in them, but that you're not going to start off as one thing and turn into another thing.
Sure.
You see, I told you I was going to say that again. And it's not the last time you're going to hear it. What changes is how we use our preferences over the course of our lifetime, and we'll eventually get into how our preferences grow over the course of a lifetime, and also how the environment, and we're talking about all those family things that we discussed earlier, are going to impact your use of your type. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the accuracy with which you can measure your preferences will change over your life, such as we talked about children being able to figure out their type. Sometimes children don't thoroughly understand the words that you use to ask them about their type until they're older. And so, those things will become more accurate as their understanding of themselves grows. I don't know how self-aware I was at 5.
Yeah, I don't think I was very self-aware.
Not in this way. Mm.
Okay, so the first 3 opposites are, we'll just start with the first one. It's extroversion and introversion. These are words that you might have heard before, used in a lot of different contexts. Jung really related extroversion and introversion to energy. So where do you get your energy? The second is about how we like to take in information, right? So are we a sensing type? Or are we an intuitive type? This can be related lots of different ways. Again, we're going to dive in deeper to each of these individual pieces later on. But you can think of like inductive versus deductive reasoning.
Sure.
You can think about kind of like these dreamers versus a realist.
I think about zoom in and zoom out.
Zoom in and zoom out, right?
So
we'll get kind of more involved in those. So of the first 3, then we've gone through extroversion and introversion, sensing and intuition.
And those are, sensing and intuition are called our perceiving preferences.
Right, our perceiving preferences.
We'll get into that more later too.
Yes. And then the third set of letters or preferences are our thinking preferences. Mm-hmm. And this is how we like to make decisions. So are we coming from a place of logic, thinking, black and white, or are we utilizing those feelings to make our judgment calls in our life, right? And which one of those things feels the most authentic and correct?
Sure. And those are called our judging preferences. And I've always hated that description because it sounds, when I first read it, I was like, does that mean that I'm judgmental?
Yeah.
Don't answer that. But judgment is meant in that decision-making
Absolutely.
way.
Yeah. What feels most authentic when we're making our decisions?
Yes. And so those are going to contribute a T or an F to a person's type. We didn't mention before with sensing and intuition. Sensing will contribute an S to a person's type. With intuition, since the I is already used on introversion, they give you an N if you have a preference for intuition. But once again, we'll get into that more later. The fourth set of preferences for type was actually added by Catherine Briggs and Isabel Briggs Myers. It was not something that was in Jung's original work. And that's going to be your judging and perceiving preferences. And that has to do with how you organize, or I always say choose not to, your outside
Or
world.
not. Right.
It has to do with somebody being more of a planner or more of an experience, go with the flow type of a person.
Right.
And you'll notice that judging and perceiving, those words we used earlier. So I'm not going to get deeply into that now, but there is something there, and I'm going to get nerd out on it when we talk about type dynamics. It makes me happy.
Yeah. We love this a little too much.
But what do you do when you love something a little too much?
You learn all about it. You dive in. You teach other people about it.
You start exactly. You just go with it, and you start a YouTube slash
and
slash.
then you have a reason to nerd out all the time.
Exactly. Yay! And then it's like I have to because I'm recording an episode.
Exactly. So we got to study it more.
It's basically my job.
Yes.
Yay!
Yes.
With that being said, that gives you, I hope, a good overview on what we're dealing with the background of Myers-Briggs.
Mm-hmm.
Our next episodes are where we're actually going to dive in. We're going to have an episode on each set of preferences.
Yes.
And we're going to help you dig into that and figure out which preferences you decide to claim as your own.
Mm-hmm.
And we will have that coming up soon. In the meantime, if you would like more information, I would encourage you. I mentioned the Psychological Type book by Jung earlier. I would also like to mention, if this is kind of a hard to find book, I'm going to try to find the link to it. But this is Catherine and Isabel, Mother's Light, Daughter's Journey by Frances Wright Saunders. And this is Catherine and Isabel on the front of the book. I will try to find the link to this. So this is more of the personal story of Catherine and Isabel and tells you more in depth of how they, came to be the, shall we say, mothers of type. If you're looking for really good information on Myers-Briggs in general, this is an easier read than Carl Jung's book. And this is sort of the, shall we say, it's the Bible of type.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It's called Gifts Differing. It was written by Isabel Briggs Myers and her son, Peter B. Myers. And I can definitely put a link. This is available on Kindle and everything.
Mm-hmm.
You can also go to personalityplaybook.com, where I haven't written anything in a really long time, but all of this information that we've discussed today is there in type.
Yeah.
And
we would love for you in the comment section if you have questions that you would like answered.
Absolutely.
Or if there's some type of nuance in your type, or maybe the type of someone that you're close to, please just type those down there in the comment section. We'd love to address those whenever we have a chance.
Absolutely. And also, we would love for you to help us out by remembering to like and subscribe.
Yes.
And with that, we will see you in about a week.
Yeah.
Thank you all and have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.